The dust had barely settled on Katherine Calloway's traveling trunk when she pushed open the heavy oak door of Mineral Park's First National Bank, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild stallion testing a new corral. The year was 1883, and the Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town nestled in the Surbat Mountains. But Katherine had faced worse heat than this during her journey west from Philadelphia, armed with nothing but her late grandmother's recipes and a dream that burned brighter than any forge. Inside the bank, the air was cooler but no less stifling. The scent of leather-bound ledgers and pipe tobacco hung thick in the cramped space. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat Edgar Thornton, the bank's president, his substantial girth straining against a silk vest that probably cost more than most miners earned in a month. His jowls quivered slightly as he peered at Katherine over gold-rimmed spectacles, taking in her travel-worn dress and the leather satchel clutched in her gloved hands. "Mr. Thornton," Katherine began, keeping her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach, "I appreciate you taking the time to see me. As I mentioned in my letter, I am seeking a business loan to establish a bakery here in Mineral Park. I have 5 years of experience working in my family's bakery back east, and I have brought detailed financial projections, recipes that have won awards, and letters of recommendation from our most prominent customers." She laid her carefully prepared documents on his desk, each page representing hours of meticulous work during the long train journey west. The numbers were sound, the business plan solid. She had chosen Mineral Park specifically because the growing mining community had money to spend but few amenities that reminded the rough men of home and comfort. Edgar Thornton did not even glance at her papers. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight, and began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle deep in his chest, then built to a full-bellied guffaw that echoed off the walls and brought his clerk scurrying from the back room to see what had caused such mirth. "A bakery," he wheezed, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket to dab at his watering eyes. "My dear young lady, surely you jest. A woman alone requesting a substantial loan to start a business, in a mining town full of rough characters who would sooner rob you blind than buy a loaf of bread. This is the most amusing thing I have heard all month." Katherine felt her cheeks burn, but she refused to look away. She had anticipated skepticism, even dismissal, but not outright mockery. "Sir, if you would just examine my projections, you would see that the business model is completely viable. The men working the mines have disposable income and a hunger for quality baked goods. There is currently no bakery within 20 miles, and the general store only stocks hardtack and basic provisions. I have calculated that even capturing a fraction of the potential market would result in profitability within the first year." Thornton waved a dismissive hand, his laughter finally subsiding into occasional chuckles. "Miss Calloway, let me explain something to you about business, about reality. This is not some finishing school exercise. This is the Arizona Territory, where fortunes are made and lost daily, where men with years of experience fail more often than they succeed. What makes you think a slip of a girl with fancy recipes and Eastern notions could possibly manage?" "Because I have a solid plan and the determination to see it through," Katherine replied, her voice gaining strength. "Because I am willing to work harder than anyone else. Because I understand both the craft and the business side of the operation." "Determination," Thornton repeated, shaking his head. "My dear, determination does not pay suppliers or keep the lights burning when customers fail to materialize. Do you have collateral, property, stocks, or bonds?" "I have my skills, my equipment, and my grandmother's recipes that people traveled across Philadelphia to taste," Katherine said, though she knew even as the words left her mouth that they would not be enough. Skills and recipes. Thornton pushed her carefully prepared documents back across the desk without having read a single word. "Miss Calloway, I suggest you find yourself a husband who can provide for you, or perhaps seek employment as a cook in one of the boarding houses. Those are suitable occupations for a woman of your station. This fantasy of running your own business, well, it is just that, a fantasy. Good day." Katherine gathered her papers with trembling hands, her vision blurring slightly as she fought back tears of frustration and humiliation. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. With her head held high, she turned and walked out of the bank into the blazing afternoon sun, the heat hitting her like a physical blow after the relative coolness inside. She stood on the wooden boardwalk, blinking against the brightness, trying to formulate her next move. The trip west had depleted most of her modest savings. She had enough for perhaps 2 months of room and board at the boarding house where she had taken a small room, but not enough to purchase supplies and equipment to start her bakery without a loan. Every bank in 100 miles would likely give her the same response Thornton had. She was a woman alone in a man's world, and her dreams apparently counted for nothing. That did not sound like it went well. The voice came from her left, a warm baritone with a hint of amusement but no mockery. Katherine turned to find a man leaning against the post supporting the bank's awning, one boot crossed over the other in a relaxed stance. He was tall and lean, with the sun-darkened skin of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. Beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson, she could make out dark hair and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. A bandana was tied loosely around his neck, and dust covered his boots. "Were you eavesdropping?" Katherine asked, more weary than accusatory. "Hard not to when Thornton's laugh could probably be heard clear to Kingman," the cowboy replied. He straightened up and touched the brim of his hat politely. "Yates Callahan, madam. And before you ask, no relation, though I noticed your last name is similar. I was waiting to make a deposit when I heard him carrying on like that. Could not help but catch bits of what you were proposing." "Katherine Calloway," she replied automatically, then frowned. "A deposit? You work one of the mines?" "No, madam. I am a ranch hand, or was until recently. Spent the last 8 years working for the Circle T ranch up north, saving every penny I could. The owner passed last month and his son decided to sell off the herd and the land. We all got paid out our wages, including some back pay that was owed. I came to town to deposit my savings and figure out my next move." Katherine noticed the worn saddle bags slung over his shoulder, likely containing the money he mentioned. 8 years of savings for a ranch hand would be substantial, probably more than most men his age possessed. She studied him more carefully. He could not be much older than her own 24 years, perhaps 26 or 27 at most. "Well, Mr. Callahan, I wish you better luck with your future than I seem to be having with mine," she said, preparing to walk away. "Hold on a minute," Yates said, falling into step beside her as she started down the boardwalk. "I could not help but hear your proposal through the door. A bakery, you said, with real Eastern recipes?" "That is correct, not that it matters now," Katherine replied, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Apparently, determination and skill are not sufficient substitutes for being born male." Yates was quiet for a moment as they walked past the general store and the assayer's office. The street was busy with miners and ranch hands, freight wagons rumbling past, kicking up dust that caught in Katherine's throat. Finally, he spoke again. How much were you asking for?" Katherine stopped and turned to face him, shading her eyes against the sun. "Why do you want to know?" "Curiosity, mainly, and maybe something else." He gestured toward a small cafe across the street. "Why do not we get out of this heat and you can tell me about this business plan of yours? I will buy you a coffee or a lemonade, whatever you prefer, and you can explain what you were trying to tell that fool Thornton." "I do not need charity, Mr. Callahan," Katherine said stiffly. "Not offering charity, Miss Calloway. Offering to listen to a business proposition." "There is a difference." His dark eyes were serious now, no hint of the amusement from before. "I have been saving my money for 8 years because I wanted to invest it in something worthwhile, something that could grow into real security. I was thinking about buying some land, maybe starting my own small ranch, but that is going to take more capital than I have alone. So I am open to other possibilities. If your plan is as sound as you seem to think it is, maybe we can help each other." Katherine wanted to refuse, wanted to walk away from this stranger who was probably just amusing himself at her expense the way Thornton had. But something in his expression stopped her. He looked genuine, and more importantly, he was offering her something no one else had, a chance to be heard. "Very well," she agreed, "but I am paying for my own lemonade." The cafe was a small establishment run by a Mexican family, the interior cooler thanks to thick adobe walls. They took a table near the back, away from the handful of other customers. The owner's wife brought them tall glasses of lemonade, the tartness cutting through the dust in Katherine's throat. She pulled out her papers again, smoothing them on the scarred wooden table. For the next hour, Katherine explained her plan in detail. She showed Yates her financial projections, breaking down the costs of supplies, equipment, rent for a suitable building, and initial operating expenses. She explained the market she had identified, the demographics of Mineral Park's population, and the lack of competition. She described her grandmother's recipes, the awards they had won at the Philadelphia Agricultural Fair, the loyal customer base her family's bakery had maintained for 3 generations. Yates listened intently, asking questions that showed he was actually considering the viability of the business. He wanted to know about supplier relationships, about the logistics of getting flour and sugar and other ingredients to Mineral Park reliably. He asked about her experience managing employees and handling accounts. His questions were sharp and practical, the questions of someone who understood hard work and the value of money. "The building I am looking at is on Silver Street, near enough to the main mining operations that workers can stop by on their way to or from their shifts," Katherine explained, pointing to a rough map she had drawn. "It is currently vacant, was a dry goods store that closed when the owner moved to California. The rent is reasonable, and it already has a stove, though I would need to have it inspected and possibly repaired. There is living space above the shop, which would save me boarding house costs." "How much for the initial investment?" Yates asked, leaning back in his chair. $3,000 would be enough to get started properly, to purchase equipment, secure 6 months of supplies, handle the rent and necessary repairs, and have a small buffer for unexpected expenses," Katherine said. She had gone over these numbers 100 times, refining them, making sure every dollar was accounted for. "I was asking the bank for $2,000 and planned to put in my own $1,000, but I only have $800 left after my travel expenses." "I have $4,200, Yates said quietly. Katherine's eyes widened. "That is a substantial sum for a ranch hand. Like I said, 8 years of saving. I did not spend money on drinking or gambling or, well, other entertainments. I sent a bit home to my mother in Texas, but the rest I saved. The Circle T paid fair wages, and when they sold out, they included a bonus for those of us who had been there longest. He traced a line on her financial projection sheet with one calloused finger. So if I were to invest $3,000 in this bakery of yours, what would you propose as the arrangement? Catherine's heart began to race. This could not be real. Men did not simply hand over their life savings to strange women they met on the street. What would you want? She asked cautiously. A partnership, Yates said simply. Equal partners. We split the profits 50-50, we split the work, we split the decisions. I am not going to lie to you, Miss Calloway. I do not know anything about baking. But I know about business, about managing money, about dealing with suppliers and customers. I can handle the front of the shop, manage the accounts, deal with any trouble that might come up. You handle the baking. Teach me what I need to know about the product. We both work hard and we both benefit. Why? Katherine asked, the word coming out almost as a whisper. Why would you risk everything you have worked for on someone you just met? Yates was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window where the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. My mother raised 4 children alone after my father died in the war. She took in laundry, sewing, anything she could do to keep us fed. When I was 14, she wanted to open a small dress shop. She had the skills, had the customers, had everything except the money to make it real. Every man she approached for help either laughed at her or offered to help in exchange for, well, let us just say unacceptable terms. She never got her shop. She is still taking in laundry at 53 years old, her hands so worn they hardly bend anymore. He turned back to Katherine, and she saw something fierce and determined in his expression. When I heard Thornton laughing at you, heard the way he dismissed everything you had worked for, it reminded me of what my mother went through. Maybe I cannot change what happened to her, but I can do something different here. Besides, and here a small smile tugged at his mouth, your numbers are solid. This actually is a good investment. I would be a fool to pass it up just because my business partner happens to be a woman. Katherine felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. She looked down at her papers, at the dreams represented in neat columns of figures and carefully written descriptions, then back up at this stranger who was offering her everything she needed. It was reckless, possibly insane, to go into business with someone she had just met. But what other choice did she have? Equal partners, she said slowly. We should have a contract drawn up, something legal that protects both of us. And I want to be clear, Mr. Callahan, this is strictly a business arrangement. I have heard stories about women in the West who find themselves in, well, compromising situations with men who claim to want to help them. Agreed completely, Yates said without hesitation. We will go to the lawyer tomorrow and have proper papers drawn up, everything legal and proper. And for what it is worth, Miss Calloway, I am not that kind of man. You have my word, and I know that does not mean much coming from a stranger, but it is all I have to offer besides my money and my willingness to work. Katherine extended her hand across the table, a gesture that would have been scandalous in Philadelphia, but felt right here in the raw, direct world of the Arizona Territory. Then we have a deal, Mr. Callahan, partners. His hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused and strong. Partners, he agreed. And if we are going to be working together every day, you might as well call me Yates. Katherine, she replied, and for the first time since she had stepped off the train in Mineral Park 3 days ago, she felt something like hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity that left Katherine exhausted but exhilarated. True to his word, Yates had accompanied her to the office of Samuel Morrison, Mineral Park's only lawyer, the very next morning. Morrison, a shrewd but fair man in his 50s, had drawn up a partnership agreement that spelled out every detail of their business arrangement. Katherine read every word carefully before signing, noting with approval that Yates had requested clauses protecting her rights and her share of the business even if they had disagreements, or if one partner wished to dissolve the arrangement. With the legal paperwork settled, they had tackled the building on Silver Street. The place was more rundown than Katherine had initially realized, with a leaking roof, a cracked window, and a stove that the local blacksmith declared barely functional. But the bones were good, the location excellent, and the rent truly was reasonable. The landlord, a grizzled prospector named Dutch Henderson who had struck silver in the early days and invested his earnings in property, seemed almost amused by their partnership. "Never seen the like," he had said, scratching his gray beard. "A lady baker and a cowboy, but your money is as good as anyone's, and truth be told, I would rather have someone in here trying to make something of themselves than let it sit empty. You fix her up nice, and we will talk about a long-term lease." Yates proved to be worth every penny of his investment in those early days. He negotiated with suppliers, securing better prices than Katherine would have managed alone. He hired carpenters to fix the roof and the window, standing over them to make sure the work was done properly. He helped her scrub years of accumulated dust and grime from every surface, both of them working until their hands were raw and their muscles ached. The living quarters above the shop were small, just 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but Katherine found them charming in their simplicity. She took the slightly larger room as her bedroom, and they converted the smaller one into a combination office and storage space. Yates insisted he would continue staying at the boarding house where he had taken a room, maintaining the propriety of their arrangement despite the raised eyebrows their partnership had already generated among the town's gossips. As they worked side by side during those long days, Katherine found herself growing comfortable with Yates in a way that surprised her. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged at unexpected moments, making her laugh when she was ready to collapse from exhaustion. He never questioned her expertise or tried to override her decisions about the bakery equipment or layout. When she explained why she needed the work table at a specific height, or why the oven had to be positioned just so, he listened and made it happen. In turn, Katherine began to see past the quiet cowboy who had approached her on the street. Yates was intelligent and observant, noticing small details that she missed. He had a gift for reading people, able to tell within minutes whether a supplier was being honest or trying to take advantage of them. He was also surprisingly well-read for someone who had spent most of his adult life on a ranch, mentioning books and newspapers he had consumed during quiet evenings. "Not much else to do after the work is done," he had explained when she commented on it. "The ranch had a small library, and the owner's wife used to pass me books. Said it was a shame for a mind to go to waste just because a man worked with his hands." 3 weeks after their partnership began, the bakery was finally ready. The sign above the door read Calloway and Callahan Bakery in crisp black letters on a white background, simple and professional. Inside, the space gleamed. The repaired stove radiated reliable heat. Fresh paint brightened the walls. The display case that Yates had found at an auction in Kingman stood ready to showcase her creations. Sacks of flour, sugar, and other ingredients were neatly stored in the back room, protected from pests and moisture. Katherine stood in the middle of their bakery, and felt tears prick her eyes. She had done it. They had done it. Against all odds and expectations, her dream was real. "You all right?" Yates asked, appearing from the back room with the last of the storage crates. "Yes," Katherine said, wiping quickly at her eyes. "I am just, well, I did not entirely believe this would happen. Even after we signed the papers and started the work, part of me kept waiting for something to go wrong. Something probably will go wrong at some point, Yates said practically, setting down the crate. But we will handle it when it does. That is what partners do. He glanced around the shop, satisfaction evident in his expression. My mother is not going to believe this when I write to her. Her son, a baker. Well, a baker's partner anyway. You should invite her to visit once we are established, Katherine suggested. I would like to meet her. She would like that, and she would definitely like you. Yates pulled out his pocket watch, an old silver piece that had belonged to his father. It is getting late. You should get some rest. Tomorrow is the big day. Opening day dawned clear and hot, the sun rising over the mountains to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Katherine had been awake since before dawn, her hands moving through the familiar rituals of mixing, kneading, and shaping. The scent of baking bread began to fill the shop around 6 in the morning, drifting out into the street through the open door. Yates arrived at 7, cleaned up and wearing a fresh shirt and vest, looking every inch the professional businessman rather than the dusty cowboy she had first met. He had purchased a new hat for the occasion, and Katherine noticed he had taken care with his appearance in a way that showed respect for what they were attempting. "Something smells like heaven," he said, inhaling deeply. "Please tell me we get to eat some of this." "I saved us 2 rolls for breakfast," Katherine said, pulling a tray from the oven. Golden brown loaves crowded the surface, their crusts crackling softly as they cooled. "And there is coffee. We need to keep our strength up." They ate quickly, standing behind the counter, watching the street begin to come alive with activity. Miners heading to their shifts, ranch hands in town for supplies, families starting their daily routines. Katherine's stomach twisted with nervousness. What if no one came? What if Thornton had been right, and this was all a foolish dream? At 8 o'clock, she unlocked the door and flipped the sign to open. For the first hour, nothing happened. Katherine tried not to watch the clock, tried to focus on arranging the baked goods in the display case, making sure everything looked perfect. Yates stood behind the counter, his expression calm, but she noticed he kept checking the street. Then around 9, an older woman paused outside, clearly drawn by the scent. She peered through the window, her weathered face skeptical. Katherine held her breath. The woman pushed open the door. "Is this a real bakery?" she asked, her accent marking her as German or possibly Austrian. "Yes, madam," Katherine replied, finding her professional smile. "Fresh bread, rolls, biscuits, and pastries, all made this morning. Real bread, not that awful hardtack from the general store. Real bread, madam. Would you like to try a sample?" Katherine cut a small piece from one of the display loaves and offered it on a napkin. The woman took a cautious bite, and her expression transformed. "Ach, this is real bread. How much?" 10 cents a loaf, 12 cents for the larger size, Katherine said, the prices they had carefully calculated to be competitive but sustainable. "I will take 4 loaves," the woman declared. "My husband, he complains every day about the food here. This will make him stop his noise." As Yates wrapped the loaves in paper and took the woman's money, 3 miners stopped in the doorway, also drawn by the scent. They were young men, probably Irish based on their accents, with the dust of the mines still on their clothes. "Is that cinnamon rolls I am smelling?" one of them asked hopefully. "Fresh from the oven," Katherine confirmed. 3 for a quarter. "Give me 6 then," the miner said, elbowing his companions. "And stop your shoving, there is plenty for all of us." By noon, half of their inventory was gone. By 2 o'clock, they had sold out of everything except a few loaves of bread that Katherine had held back. A steady stream of customers had flowed through the door all day. miners and ranch hands and townspeople who were sick of bland, basic food and willing to pay for quality. The cash box was satisfyingly heavy with coins. "We need to make more," Katherine said, already calculating quantities in her head. "If this keeps up, we will need to double our output." "Then we will double our output," Yates agreed, his grin broad. He looked years younger when he smiled like that, and Katherine found herself smiling back. "Katherine, I think we might actually have something here." "I think we might," she agreed, and the warmth in her chest had nothing to do with the heat of the ovens. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that Katherine found deeply satisfying. She would wake before dawn and make her way down to the shop, starting the first batches while the town was still dark and quiet. Yates would arrive around 6, having already made the rounds to check on supply deliveries or handle other business matters. They would work together through the busy morning hours when miners stopped by before their shifts, then through the afternoon rush when families came to purchase bread for dinner. In the evenings, after they closed the shop at 6, they would sit at the small table in the back room and go over the accounts, planning for the next day, discussing what was selling well and what they might need to add to their offerings. These quiet hours became Katherine's favorite part of the day. In the stillness after the chaos, with the last light of sunset slanting through the window, she and Yates would talk about more than just business. She learned that he had been the eldest of 4 children, with 3 younger sisters who now all had families of their own back in Texas. He had left home at 16 to find work that would help support his mother, sending money back whenever he could. He spoke of the ranch with affection, describing the wide open spaces and the satisfaction of working with horses and cattle. He had a gift for storytelling, painting pictures with words that made Katherine see the places and people he described. In turn, she told him about her life in Philadelphia, about growing up in the back rooms of her family's bakery, learning her craft from her grandmother who had immigrated from Germany, with recipes passed down through generations. She spoke of the grief of losing first her grandmother, then her parents within 2 years of each other to influenza, leaving her alone at 22 with nothing but her skills and the determination to make something of herself. "Is that why you came west?" Yates asked one evening about 6 weeks after they had opened. "To get away from the memories." "Partly," Katherine admitted. She was decorating a cake for a customer's birthday, her hand steady as she piped frosting flowers along the edge. "But mostly because I knew I would never be taken seriously back east. The bakery was my father's, then briefly mine, but every supplier, every business contact, they all treated me like a temporary inconvenience. I heard through a regular customer that the building owner was planning to sell to someone else when my lease was up, someone he considered more reliable. A man, of course. So you decided to start fresh where no one knew you," Yates said thoughtfully. "Where no one had preconceived notions about what I could or could not do. Ironic, is it not? I came west to escape prejudice and ran straight into Thornton." She set down her piping bag and flexed her fingers. "If you had not been there that day, I do not know what I would have done." "You would have found another way," Yates said with certainty. "You are not the type to give up. You would have worked, saved, done whatever it took. I just helped it happen faster." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Katherine asked, but she was smiling. "That you did not save me?" "I invested in a solid business opportunity," Yates replied, but there was warmth in his dark eyes. "Best decision I ever made." Something in the air between them shifted in that moment, becoming charged with an awareness that had been building slowly over the past weeks. Katherine found herself noticing details she had not paid attention to before. The way Yates's hair curled slightly at his collar when it got too long, the small scar on his left hand from a roping accident, the way his whole face changed when he smiled. She noticed how he always made sure she ate during the busy times, appearing with a sandwich or an apple when she forgot. How he stood just a little too close when they were working together, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. She told herself it was just the proximity, just the natural result of spending so much time together. They were business partners, nothing more. It would be foolish and complicated to feel anything else, but her heart, it seemed, had different ideas. The moment Katherine admitted to herself that her feelings had crossed the boundary from partnership into something deeper came on a sweltering afternoon in late July. The heat had driven most sensible people indoors during the worst of the day, and the bakery was experiencing a rare lull in customers. She was in the back room, working on a special order of petit fours for a party at the mayor's house, when she heard raised voices from the front of the shop. "I am telling you, your prices are too high," a man's voice boomed, aggressive and loud. 15 cents for a loaf of bread. That is highway robbery. "Our prices are clearly posted, sir," Yates replied, his voice level but firm. "If you feel they are too high, you are welcome to purchase your bread elsewhere." "Maybe I should just take what I want," the man said, and Katherine heard the threat beneath the words. "Who is going to stop me? A cowboy playing shopkeeper?" She moved quickly to the doorway and saw a large man, easily 6.5 feet tall and built like a bull, leaning over the counter toward Yates. He was drunk. That much was obvious from his unsteady stance and the whiskey fumes that probably filled the shop. His meaty fists were clenched, and violence radiated from him like heat from a stove. Yates stood his ground, not backing down an inch despite the size difference. His expression was calm, but Katherine noticed his weight had shifted to the balls of his feet, his body coiled and ready. She had never seen him look dangerous before, but in that moment she recognized the steel beneath the quiet exterior. "I would advise against that course of action," Yates said softly. "You should go sleep off whatever you have been drinking, and we will forget this happened." "You threatening me, boy?" the drunk snarled, reaching across the counter to grab Yates's shirt. What happened next occurred so fast Katherine barely tracked it. Yates caught the man's wrist, twisted, and suddenly the drunk was bent over the counter, his arm locked at an angle that had to be painful. Yates had not raised his voice, had not lost his composure, but he had complete control of the situation. "I am going to let you go now," Yates said calmly. "And you are going to walk out that door and not come back until you are sober and ready to be civil. Do we understand each other?" The drunk grunted something that might have been agreement, and Yates released him. The man stumbled toward the door, cradling his arm, shooting them both a venomous look before disappearing into the street. Katherine realized she was holding her breath and let it out slowly. "Are you all right?" she asked, moving to Yates's side. "I am fine," he assured her, straightening his shirt. "Sorry about that. Figured it was better to end it quick than let it escalate." "Where did you learn to do that?" Katherine asked, still processing the speed and efficiency of what she had witnessed. "Ranch work is not always peaceful," Yates said with a slight shrug. "You learn to handle yourself when disputes come up, especially during long drives or when dealing with claim jumpers. My father taught me some before he died, and I learned more over the years. Never been much for fighting, but I know how to defend myself and others when needed." Others. He had been protecting her, protecting their business. The realization sent warmth flooding through her chest. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just her business partner but the man beneath. The man who had invested everything he had in a stranger's dream, who worked 18-hour days without complaint, who listened to her ideas and treated her as an equal, who stood between her and danger without hesitation. "Thank you," she said softly. "Just part of the job," Yates replied, but the way he looked at her, the softness in his eyes, suggested he knew they were talking about more than just the immediate incident. They stood there for a long moment, the air between them electric, both of them on the verge of saying something that would change everything. Then the bell above the door chimed as a customer entered, breaking the spell, and they both turned to greet the new arrival with professional smiles. But something had shifted irrevocably. Katherine could not unsee what she had discovered, could not unfeel the rush of emotion that had swept through her when she thought Yates might be hurt. She was falling for her business partner, possibly had been falling for him since the day he had offered her a chance when everyone else had laughed. And that terrified her more than any drunk customer ever could. Over the following weeks, Katherine tried to maintain professional distance, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with a teacup. Every small gesture from Yates undid her attempts at detachment. The way he brought her wildflowers one morning because he had noticed she had been admiring them on their walk to inspect a supplier's warehouse. The way he learned to ice basic cakes and cookies so he could help during busy periods, his large hands surprisingly deft with a piping bag. The way he defended her ideas when male customers tried to argue with her about orders, never overriding her but simply standing beside her as a united front. She caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, his expression unguarded and tender in a way that made her heart race. But he never said anything, never crossed the professional line they had drawn between them. She wondered if he felt it too, this growing thing between them, or if she was imagining it born of her own desires. The answer came on an evening in late August, 3 months after they had opened. Business had been good enough that they had hired their first employee, a young woman named Sarah Mitchell, who helped with the front counter during the busiest hours. With Sarah handling the late afternoon customers, Katherine found herself with a rare free hour. She had wandered out to the small patch of ground behind the building, a neglected space she had been thinking about turning into a garden. She was lost in thought, imagining vegetable beds and maybe a small herb garden for cooking, when she heard the back door open and close. She turned to find Yates approaching, his hat in his hands, his expression serious in a way that made anxiety flutter in her stomach. "Is something wrong?" she asked immediately. "Is there a problem with the accounts?" "No, nothing like that," Yates assured her quickly. "Business is fine. Better than fine, actually. We are on track to make back my full investment within the year at this rate." "Then what is it?" Katherine asked, puzzled by his obvious nervousness. Yates turned his hat in his hands, a gesture she had learned meant he was working up to saying something difficult. "Katherine, we need to talk about something, and I am not sure how to start, so I am just going to say it straight. I think I am falling in love with you, and it is making it damn near impossible to focus on anything else." Katherine felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "What? I know," Yates continued, the words coming faster now as if he needed to get them all out before he lost his nerve. "This is not what we agreed to. This is not part of our partnership contract. Believe me, I have been telling myself that for weeks now, trying to talk myself out of feeling this way. But it is not working. Every time you smile at a customer, every time you get excited about a new recipe, every time you stand up for yourself or for our business, I fall a little bit more. And I needed to tell you, even though I know it might complicate everything, because I cannot keep pretending that we are just business partners when you are the last thing I think about before I sleep, and the first thing I think about when I wake up." He stopped, breathing hard, looking at her with such raw vulnerability that Katherine felt her own walls crumbling. "You could have told me," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I did not want to make you uncomfortable," Yates said. "I did not want you to feel like you owed me anything or like I was taking advantage of our partnership. Your dream, this bakery, it is important. I did not want my feelings to ruin it." "Yates," Katherine said, taking a step closer to him. "Do you remember that day when the drunk man tried to rob us?" He looked confused by the change of topic but nodded. "Of course. What about it?" "That was the day I realized I was falling for you too," Katherine confessed, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I had been trying so hard to keep things professional, to not let myself feel anything beyond gratitude and friendship. But when I saw you facing down that man, when I thought you might get hurt, something in me just broke open. I have been terrified ever since, trying to figure out what to do about it." "You mean you feel the same way?" Yates asked, hope lighting his features in a way that made him impossibly handsome. "I do," Katherine confirmed. "I love working with you. I love the way you believe in me, the way you listen to my ideas, the way you make me laugh when I am exhausted. I love your strength and your kindness and your terrible jokes that you think are hilarious. I love the way you look at me like I am the most interesting person in the world. Yes, Yates Callahan, I am falling in love with you. I might already be completely in love with you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, brilliant and warming everything it touched. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," Katherine whispered. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. His lips were soft and warm, and Katherine felt herself melting into him, her hands clutching his shirt to steady herself as the world spun. It was nothing like the chaste kiss she had once received from a Philadelphia suitor, all awkward politeness. This was heat and hunger and tenderness all woven together, a promise and a claiming all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "So what do we do now?" he asked. "I suppose we figure it out together," Katherine said, her hands sliding up to link behind his neck. "Just like we have figured out everything else." "I like the sound of that," Yates murmured and kissed her again. Their relationship transformed, and yet somehow stayed the same. They were still partners in the bakery, still worked side by side for long hours, still debated pricing and recipes and business strategy. But now there were stolen kisses in the back room when no customers were around, hands brushing with deliberate intent when they passed each other, private smiles that spoke of shared secrets. Yates continued to stay at the boarding house, maintaining propriety even though the entire town had probably figured out by now that the partnership had become something more. Katherine appreciated his respect for her reputation, even in a rough mining town where conventions were often looser than back east. They began taking Sunday afternoons off, the one day they closed the bakery, to explore the area around Mineral Park. Yates borrowed horses from a friend who ran the livery stable, and they would ride out into the desert, following trails into the mountains or down to the valley. Katherine, who had never ridden much before coming west, improved quickly under Yates's patient instruction. On one of these rides, about a month after they had confessed their feelings, they stopped to rest near a small spring that created an unlikely oasis of green in the sun-baked landscape. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, sharing the lunch Katherine had packed, and watched a hawk circle lazily overhead. "I have been thinking," Yates said, leaning back against the tree trunk and pulling Katherine against his side. She settled into him naturally, her head on his shoulder. About the future. What about it? Katherine asked, content in the warmth of the day and his presence. The bakery is doing well, better than we projected. We have already hired Sarah, and we are going to need more help soon if business keeps growing. That is all good, but I keep wondering what comes next. For us, I mean, not just the business. Katherine felt her pulse quicken. What do you want to come next? Yates was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking slowly through her hair. I want to marry you, he said finally. I want us to be real partners in every way, not just in business. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build a life together, a family maybe, if you want that. I know we have only been together a few months, and this probably seems fast, but Katherine, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Katherine sat up so she could look at him properly. His expression was open, vulnerable, showing her everything he felt. I want that too, she said softly. All of it. But Yates, are you sure? Being married to someone who runs a business is not going to be easy. There will be long hours and stress and probably times when I am too tired to be good company. And I will be right there with you through all of it, Yates replied. That is what marriage is supposed to be, is it not? Two people building something together, supporting each other. We already do that with the bakery. This just makes it official for everything else too. Then yes, Katherine said, joy bubbling up inside her like champagne. Yes, I will marry you, Yates Callahan. He kissed her there beneath the cottonwood tree, and Katherine thought she had never been happier in her life. Everything she had dreamed of when she had stepped off that train in Mineral Park, everything she had fought for and worked for, had come true beyond her wildest expectations. She had her bakery, she had success, and now she had love. They were married on a crisp October morning, just over 6 months after the day they had met on the street outside the bank. The ceremony took place in the small church that served Mineral Park's scattered Christian population, officiated by a circuit preacher who happened to be in town. Katherine wore a simple cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Yates had ridden out before dawn to collect. The guest list was small but meaningful. Sarah and her family. Dutch Henderson, their landlord, who had become something of a friend. A handful of their regular customers. Samuel Morrison, the lawyer who had drawn up their original partnership agreement, now adjusted to reflect their marriage. And standing beside Yates as his best man, a weathered ranch hand named Tom who had worked with him at the Circle T and had ridden down from the new job he had found in Nevada when he received Yates's letter. But the most important guest was Mary Callahan, Yates's mother, who had arrived from Texas 2 days before the wedding. She was a small woman, her dark hair shot through with silver, her hands showing the wear of hard work, but her eyes were bright and sharp. When Yates introduced Katherine, Mary had pulled her into a fierce hug. "So you are the woman who made my son believe in miracles," Mary had said, holding Katherine at arm's length to study her. "He wrote me all about you, about the bakery, about how you were laughed at by that pompous banker. I am so proud of both of you for proving him wrong." "I could not have done it without Yates," Katherine replied honestly. "And he could not have done it without you," Mary countered. "That is what makes a good partnership. Now I want to hear everything about these famous recipes of yours." Katherine had spent the evening before the wedding showing Mary her grandmother's recipe book, the two of them trading techniques and stories in the bakery's kitchen, while Yates looked on with obvious happiness at seeing two of the most important women in his life getting along. Now, as Katherine stood beside Yates in the simple church, promising to love and honor him for the rest of her life, she saw tears sliding down Mary's weathered cheeks. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Yates kissed her to scattered applause, Katherine felt a sense of rightness settle into her bones. This was where she was meant to be. This was who she was meant to be with. The reception was held in the bakery, which they had closed for the day and decorated with bunting and flowers. Katherine had baked a small but elegant cake, 3 tiers covered in white frosting and decorated with spun sugar flowers. There was music from a fiddle player, dancing in the street outside when the shop became too crowded, and enough food and drink to satisfy everyone who had come to celebrate with them. As the afternoon wore into evening and the guests began to drift away, Katherine found herself standing with Mary while Yates settled the final details with Tom, who would be leaving in the morning to return to Nevada. "You have made him very happy," Mary said, watching her son with obvious affection. "I worried about him for so long, working himself to exhaustion on that ranch, saving every penny but never really living. He was so focused on making something of himself, on being able to help me and his sisters, that he forgot to think about what he wanted for his own life. Then he met you, and everything changed." "He saved me too," Katherine said. "I was ready to give up when he found me. I had traveled all this way, had all these plans, and then that banker laughed in my face and I did not know what to do next." "Edgar Thornton is a fool," Mary said bluntly. "But I suppose we should thank him for his foolishness, because if he had given you that loan, you and Yates never would have met." It was a strange thought, but Mary was right. If Thornton had taken her seriously, Katherine would have been struggling alone to make the bakery work without Yates's support, his business sense, his partnership. Everything might have turned out very differently. "You think it is wrong that I am glad he refused me?" Katherine asked quietly. "Not wrong at all," Mary assured her. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. You just have to be brave enough to keep moving forward when the world tells you to give up." She squeezed Katherine's hand. "Welcome to the family, daughter." That night, after the guests had left and the bakery was cleaned up, Katherine and Yates climbed the stairs to the living quarters that were now truly theirs, husband and wife. They had spent the last week preparing the rooms, combining their belongings, making the space feel like a real home rather than just a place to sleep. Yates paused at the threshold, then swept Katherine into his arms, making her laugh as he carried her over and set her down gently in the middle of what was now their bedroom. The last light of sunset painted everything in gold and amber, and for a moment they just stood there looking at each other, the weight of what they had promised settling over them. "I love you," Katherine said, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. "I love you so much, Yates." "I love you too," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with too much optimism and not enough sense to know when something was impossible. Thank you for seeing past what everyone else thought I should be and believing in who I actually was," Katherine countered. They came together then, no longer restrained by propriety or partnership boundaries, free to express everything they felt for each other. Yates was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Katherine felt cherished and desired. When they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, both sated and happy, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her here. Less than a year ago, she had been alone and grieving in Philadelphia, her future uncertain. Now she lay in the arms of the man she loved, in a home they had built together, with a thriving business and a future that gleamed with possibility. The West had been everything she had hoped for and more, not because it was easier or more accepting, but because it had brought her Yates. "What are you thinking about?" Yates murmured, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "How sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places," Katherine said. How a chance meeting on a dusty street can change everything. Nothing chance about it, Yates said. I think it was fate. We were meant to find each other, meant to build something together. You believe in fate? Katherine asked, surprised. He had always seemed so practical. I believe in you and me, Yates replied. And I believe that everything that happened to both of us, all the hard parts and the disappointments, they were leading us to that moment outside the bank. So maybe that is fate, or maybe it is just luck, but either way I am grateful for it. Katherine nestled closer to him, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek. So am I, she whispered. So am I. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of work and growth and deepening love. The bakery continued to thrive, becoming a central part of Mineral Park's community. They hired 2 more employees, including a young man fresh from San Francisco who had trained in a professional bakery and could help Katherine develop more complex pastries and desserts. They negotiated a long-term lease with Dutch Henderson, who was so pleased with how they had transformed the property that he gave them a discount. Katherine introduced new items regularly, keeping customers interested and coming back. Her grandmother's stollen became a sensation during the Christmas season, with people placing orders weeks in advance. Her birthday cakes developed a reputation for both beauty and taste, leading to commissions for weddings and other celebrations. And her simple bread, the foundation of everything she made, remained a daily staple for dozens of families. Yates proved to be more than just a capable businessman. He had a gift for making customers feel valued, remembering names and preferences, asking after children and families. He expanded their wholesale business, negotiating contracts to supply bread to 2 of the mining company boarding houses and to a restaurant that had opened in Kingman. He managed the finances with careful attention, ensuring they not only survived but built up reserves for the inevitable difficulties of business. But more than any business success, it was their marriage that truly flourished. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learning when to push and when to give space, when to talk and when silence was enough. They had their disagreements, of course. Katherine could be stubborn about her recipes, resistant to change even when Yates gently suggested that maybe customers would appreciate some variation. Yates sometimes made business decisions without consulting her first, then had to backtrack when she reminded him they were supposed to be equal partners. But they learned to work through these conflicts, to communicate and compromise. And through it all, the love between them only grew stronger. They stole moments of tenderness in the middle of busy days, a quick kiss when passing in the back room, hands clasped beneath the table during business meetings. Their nights were filled with whispered conversations and tender lovemaking, building intimacy that went beyond the physical. Mary Callahan visited again the following spring, staying for a month to help with the busy Easter season. Katherine cherished the time with her mother-in-law, learning new techniques and trading stories. Mary had a wicked sense of humor and a practical wisdom that came from a lifetime of hard experiences. She also had no qualms about putting her son in his place when he needed it, which Katherine found both amusing and useful. "He gets that stubborn streak from his father," Mary confided one evening while they were preparing dough for the next morning. "Good man, but once he had an idea in his head, dynamite could not dislodge it. Yates is the same way. You just have to be more stubborn than he is. Let him think it was his idea and everything works out." "I will keep that in mind," Katherine said, laughing. "You are good for him," Mary continued, her tone becoming more serious. "He was always so focused on responsibility, on taking care of everyone else, that he forgot to think about his own happiness. But with you, he has both. He has purpose and partnership and love. That is all a mother can hope for her children." During that visit, on a warm evening in April with the desert in bloom around them, Katherine told Yates and Mary the news she had been waiting to share. They were sitting at the small table in the living quarters, finishing dinner, when she reached across and took Yates's hand. "I have something to tell you both," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." The joy on Yates's face was everything she had hoped for and more. He let out a whoop that probably startled the neighbors, sweeping Katherine into his arms and spinning her around, despite her laughing protests to be careful. Mary was crying and laughing at the same time, hugging them both, already planning all the things she would make for her first grandchild. "When?" Yates asked, setting Katherine down gently, his hands going immediately to her still flat stomach. "October, the doctor thinks," Katherine replied. "I wanted to be sure before I said anything." "October," Yates repeated, awe in his voice. "We are going to be parents in October." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Yates said, pulling her close. "Katherine, this is everything. You are everything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the physical demands of running the bakery. Katherine adjusted her work schedule, coming in a bit later in the mornings and leaving more of the heavy lifting to their employees. Yates became even more protective, fussing over her in a way that was both endearing and occasionally irritating, when she felt perfectly capable of doing things herself. They spent their rare free time preparing the second room in their living quarters as a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow, and building a crib from plans Yates found in a catalog. Katherine sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her hands creating with thread and fabric the same care and love she put into her baking. As summer gave way to fall and Katherine's belly grew round with their child, she found herself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. 2 years ago, she had stepped off a train into an uncertain future, armed with nothing but determination and recipes. Now she had a thriving business, a loving husband, and a child on the way. The fear and uncertainty of those early days seemed like a distant memory, though she had not forgotten the lessons they taught her about perseverance and taking chances. The baby arrived on a cool October night, making his entrance into the world with a loud cry that announced his presence to everyone in the vicinity. The birth was long and difficult, Katherine laboring through the night and into the next day with Yates at her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, offering whatever comfort he could. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in Mineral Park, guided them through the process with calm efficiency. When the baby finally arrived, and Mrs. Chen placed the squalling, red-faced infant in Katherine's arms, she felt a rush of love so intense it was almost painful. This tiny person, this perfect combination of her and Yates, was more miraculous than anything she had ever created in her ovens. "It is a boy," Mrs. Chen announced with satisfaction. "Strong and healthy with good lungs." Yates was crying unashamedly as he looked down at his son, his large hand stroking the baby's dark hair with infinite gentleness. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Katherine, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Katherine asked, exhausted but too overwhelmed with joy to sleep. They had discussed names over the past months, going back and forth on various options, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at their son, Katherine knew exactly what she wanted. "James," she said. "After your father, James Callahan." Yates looked at her, new tears spilling down his cheeks. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Katherine confirmed. "Your father should be remembered, and I can think of no better way than to name our son after him." "James Callahan," Yates repeated, testing the name. "I like it." My mother is going to be beside herself when she finds out. Life with a newborn was chaotic in ways Katherine had not fully anticipated. James was a good baby overall, but he had his father's lungs and his mother's stubborn streak, making his opinions known loudly when he was hungry or tired or simply wanted attention. Katherine had to adjust her schedule dramatically, focusing on feeding and caring for James while Yates took on more of the bakery responsibilities. Their employees stepped up admirably. Sarah, who had been with them from nearly the beginning, essentially ran the front of the shop now, training the newer staff and handling customer relations. Daniel, the young baker from San Francisco, had developed his skills to the point where he could handle most of the daily production with only occasional oversight from Katherine. It was strange at first, letting go of some of the control she had always maintained, but Katherine found that it was also liberating. She discovered that she loved being a mother with the same intensity she loved baking. There was something deeply satisfying about nursing James, watching him grow stronger and more alert each day, seeing tiny hints of personality emerge. Yates was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with James during fussy nights, changing diapers without complaint, spending his free time just holding his son and talking to him in a soft voice about everything and nothing. Mary came to visit when James was 2 months old, traveling from Texas despite the winter weather because she could not wait any longer to meet her grandson. She stayed for 3 months that time, helping with the baby and teaching Katherine things about motherhood that only experience could provide. The time together deepened the bond between the two women, creating a relationship that went beyond the typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law dynamic into something approaching true friendship. On a clear February morning, Katherine bundled James against the cold and walked with Yates down to the bakery, which they had left in Sarah's capable hands for the morning. They were meeting with Samuel Morrison to finalize some legal documents updating their partnership agreement and will to account for James. As they walked past the bank, Katherine paused, looking at the building where her Western adventure had almost ended before it began. She had not thought about Edgar Thornton in months, had been too busy with her life to pay attention to the man who had dismissed her so thoroughly. "You know, I heard Thornton lost a substantial sum in a bad mining investment," Yates commented, noticing where she was looking. "Had to sell his house and move to smaller quarters. Apparently, his judgment about business opportunities is not as sound as he thought." "I should probably feel some satisfaction about that," Katherine said, "but mostly I just feel sorry for him. He is so trapped by his assumptions about the world that he misses opportunities right in front of him." "That is more generous than he deserves," Yates said, "but it is one of the things I love about you. You do not hold grudges." "Life is too short for grudges," Katherine replied. "Besides, if he had given me that loan, I would have been so busy trying to manage everything alone that I might never have really gotten to know you. So, in a way, his refusal was the best thing that could have happened." They continued down the street, James sleeping peacefully against Katherine's shoulder, heading toward Morrison's office and then on to the bakery. As they walked, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought them here, the fear and determination that had driven her west. The moment of despair outside the bank, the unexpected offer from a dusty cowboy with kind eyes and a good heart. All of it had led to this, walking through Mineral Park with her husband and son, on their way to conduct business in the successful bakery they had built together. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by hard work, continued success, and growing love. The bakery expanded into the building next door when the tailor shop closed, giving them more space for production, and allowing them to add a small cafe area where customers could sit and enjoy coffee with their pastries. Katherine trained 2 apprentices, passing on her grandmother's techniques to a new generation. Yates's business acumen led to a second location in Kingman, which they opened in partnership with a local family who wanted to learn the trade. James grew into a sturdy, curious toddler, then a bright child who loved spending time in the bakery, standing on a stool beside his mother to help with simple tasks. When he was 3, Katherine became pregnant again, and the following spring she gave birth to twin daughters. Yates had looked at the 2 tiny girls, identical in every way, and declared himself the luckiest man in the territory. "How am I supposed to tell them apart?" he asked, cradling one in each arm while Katherine rested after the delivery. "You will learn," Katherine said, smiling at the sight of her strong cowboy husband looking so bewildered by 2 tiny babies. "Just like you learned everything else about being a father." They named the twins Emma and Rose, after Katherine's grandmother and Yates's youngest sister. The girls were indeed identical, causing confusion for everyone except their parents and brother, who always seemed to know who was who. They had their mother's green eyes and their father's dark hair, and from the beginning, they showed signs of inheriting Katherine's creativity and Yates's determination. Mary became a frequent visitor, eventually deciding to move to Mineral Park permanently when Yates's sisters were all settled with families of their own. She took a small house near the bakery and became an integral part of the business and the family, helping with the children and teaching advanced techniques to the apprentices. Her presence enriched all their lives, and Katherine was grateful to have her so close. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Katherine by closing the bakery for an entire day, something they had never done except for Christmas and Thanksgiving. He had arranged for Mary to watch the children, and he took Katherine on a long ride out into the desert, following trails they had explored in the early days of their courtship. They stopped at the spring where he had first proposed, now a place that held sacred significance in their personal history. The cottonwood tree had grown, its branches spreading wider, offering more shade. Yates spread out a blanket and unpacked the lunch he had prepared, simple but thoughtful fare that showed how much he had learned about food from living with a baker. 5 years, Katherine said, leaning back against him as they watched clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Yates agreed, his arms around her waist. "Sometimes I still cannot believe that I got so lucky, that you chose me, that we built all of this together." "I did not choose you because of luck," Katherine said, turning in his arms to face him. "I chose you because you saw me as a partner, as an equal, because you believed in me and my dreams. Because you were willing to risk everything on a stranger with a good business plan and a head full of recipes." "Best investment I ever made," Yates said, echoing words he had spoken years before. But now they carried layers of meaning, encompassing not just the bakery but their marriage, their children, their entire life together. "Thank you," Katherine said softly, "for that day outside the bank, for listening when no one else would, for being exactly who you are." "Thank you for saying yes," Yates replied, "to the partnership, to the marriage, to all of it." They stayed there by the spring until the afternoon light began to slant long across the desert, talking about their dreams for the future, about maybe buying a small ranch property where the children could grow up with animals and open space, about traveling to Texas so the kids could meet Yates's sisters and see where their father came from. They talked about the bakery, about training the right people to eventually take over more of the daily operations so Katherine and Yates could focus on other things, about maybe writing down all of Catherine's recipes in a proper book that could be published and shared. But mostly they just enjoyed being together, away from the demands and responsibilities of daily life, remembering who they had been when they first found each other and celebrating who they had become. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange and deep purple, Yates helped Katherine to her feet and they rode back toward town. As Mineral Park came into view, lights beginning to glow in windows as families settled in for the evening, Katherine felt a profound sense of gratitude. This place, which had seemed so foreign and intimidating when she first arrived, was now home in the truest sense of the word. The bakery thrived through the children's childhood years, becoming a Mineral Park institution. Regular customers brought their children and eventually their grandchildren to purchase Katherine's bread and pastries. The cafe became a gathering place where business deals were discussed over coffee, where friends met to catch up on gossip, where marriage proposals happened over slices of Katherine's famous chocolate cake. James, as he grew older, showed a genuine interest in the business, learning the craft from his mother and the practical management from his father. By the time he was 15, he was already talking about new ideas, about mail-order business that could ship their goods to other towns, about expanding the cafe concept. Katherine and Yates listened to his enthusiasm with pride, seeing in him a combination of both their strengths. The twins, Emma and Rose, were different from their brother but equally special. Emma showed artistic talent, decorating cakes with elaborate designs that went beyond anything Katherine had achieved. Rose had a head for numbers that rivaled her father's, understanding accounts and projections with an ease that suggested she might take over the business side of operations someday. But Katherine and Yates were careful never to pressure their children about the bakery. They wanted each of them to find their own path, whether that meant continuing the family business or pursuing something entirely different. The bakery was their dream, but their children should have the freedom to discover their own. When Katherine turned 42, the family gathered for a celebration that included not just their immediate household, but also Mary, now in her 70s, but still spry and sharp, and several of Yates's sisters and their families who had made the journey from Texas. The party was held in the expanded cafe space, with tables pushed together and overflowing with food, including a magnificent cake that Emma had decorated with painstaking detail. As Katherine looked around at the gathered faces, at the life she and Yates had built, she felt overwhelmed with emotion. These people, this place, this business that had started with a desperate plea and an unexpected act of faith, it was more than she had ever dared to dream. Yates found her standing alone for a moment, needing a breath away from the crowd, looking out the window at the street where they had first met 2 decades before. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist in the familiar, comfortable way of long partnership. "That banker," Katherine said, surprising them both. "Edgar Thornton, do you remember him?" "Hard to forget the man who laughed in your face," Yates replied. "Why are you thinking about him?" "Because I ran into his wife at the general store last week," Katherine explained. "She told me he passed away last month. Heart failure, apparently. And I realized that I had not thought about him in years, had not carried any anger about what happened. He was just a small man with small ideas, and his opinion stopped mattering the moment you offered me partnership." "He probably never even realized what he missed," Yates said. "The chance to be part of something real and growing." "His loss was definitely our gain," Katherine agreed, leaning into her husband's solid warmth. "Every decision, every moment, it all led here, to this bakery, to you, to our family. I would not change a single thing." Not even the hard parts, Yates asked gently. The struggles in the beginning, the times we disagreed, the moments when it seemed like too much, not even those, Katherine confirmed, because they made us stronger. They taught us how to work together, how to trust each other. The easy path would not have built what we have. They stood there together for a few more moments, husband and wife, partners in every sense, watching the street outside where their story had begun. Then James called out that they were about to cut the cake, and they turned back to rejoin the celebration, their hands naturally finding each other, fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as automatic as breathing over the years. The party lasted well into the evening, filled with laughter and stories and the comfortable chaos of family. As Katherine finally said goodnight to the last guest and helped clean up the cafe with her family, she realized that this was happiness. Not the dramatic, overwhelming rush of new love, though she remembered those feelings fondly, but the deep, abiding contentment of a life well lived, of dreams achieved and challenges overcome together. As the children grew into adulthood, the bakery continued to evolve. James eventually did take over much of the daily operations, implementing his ideas about expansion and modernization, while still respecting the traditional recipes and techniques that had made the business successful. Emma opened a specialized cake and pastry shop in Kingman, creating elaborate confections that became famous throughout the territory. Rose, to everyone's surprise, decided to study law, becoming one of the few female lawyers in the Arizona territory, and using her skills to help other women business owners navigate contracts and legal issues. Katherine and Yates gradually stepped back from the daily grind of running the bakery, though they never fully retired. Katherine still came in several times a week to bake, finding peace and purpose in the familiar rituals. Yates handled special projects and mentored James in the more complex aspects of business management. But they also had time now for other things, for travel and leisure and quiet moments together. They bought that small ranch property they had talked about years before, a modest spread in the valley below Mineral Park with a small house, a barn and enough land for some cattle and horses. It became their retreat, the place they escaped to when they needed space from town life. Yates taught Katherine to truly ride, not just the basic skills she had picked up over the years, but the fluid, confident horsemanship of someone who had grown up in the saddle. Katherine planted a large garden, experimenting with vegetables and herbs, bringing fresh ingredients back to the bakery to inspire new recipes. They took a trip to Texas to visit Yates's family home, showing Katherine where he had grown up and introducing her to cousins and childhood friends. They traveled to San Francisco, experiencing the bustling city and its diverse culinary scene, finding inspiration that they brought back to Mineral Park. They even took a train east to Philadelphia, so Yates could see where Katherine had come from, walking past the building that had housed her family's bakery, now occupied by a shoe store, and visiting her family's graves to pay respects. Through all of it, through every adventure and quiet day, every triumph and setback, they remained partners in the deepest sense. They had learned each other so thoroughly over the decades that conversations could happen with just a glance, that comfort could be found in simple presence. The passion of their early days had mellowed into something deeper and more sustaining, a love built on respect and trust and countless shared experiences. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. James was there with his wife and their 3 children. Emma brought her husband and twin sons. Rose, still unmarried and focused on her legal career, had taken time away from her busy practice to be present. Mary, now in her early 90s and frail but still mentally sharp, sat in a place of honor, surrounded by the grandchildren and great-grandchildren she had lived long enough to know. As the sun set over the mountains and the family gathered around a long table under the stars for dinner, Katherine looked at the faces illuminated by lantern light and felt the weight of gratitude settle over her like a beloved blanket. This abundance, this richness of life and love and connection, had all started with a rejection and an act of faith. 30 years, Yates said, standing to offer a toast, his hair now silver but his eyes still the same warm brown that had first caught Katherine's attention. 30 years since Katherine Calloway agreed to partner with a dusty cowboy who had more optimism than sense. "You had plenty of sense," Katherine interjected, earning a laugh from the assembled family. "Maybe," Yates conceded with a smile, "but what I definitely had was recognition. Recognition that when opportunity presents itself, sometimes wearing an unlikely disguise, you grab hold and do not let go." Katherine had a dream, a plan, and the determination to make it real. All she needed was someone willing to believe in her and invest in that vision. He turned to look at his wife, his expression tender. "You have given me everything, Katherine. A purpose, a family, a life richer than anything I could have imagined when I was a ranch hand sleeping in a bunkhouse and saving every penny. You are the best investment, the best decision, the best partner anyone could ask for." Katherine rose and moved to his side, taking his hand. "We did this together," she said, addressing both Yates and the gathered family. "Every step of the way, we built this life as partners. And that is what I want all of you to remember. That success, real lasting success, comes from finding people who believe in you, who work with you rather than against you, who celebrate your strengths and support you through your weaknesses." "To partnership," James said, raising his glass. "To family," Emma added. "To love," Rose finished. Everyone drank, and then the dinner began in earnest, conversation flowing as easily as the wine. Katherine found herself watching it all with wonder, this life that had bloomed from such unlikely beginnings. She thought about that desperate young woman standing outside the bank in Mineral Park, her dreams shattered by mockery, not knowing that her entire future was about to walk up and offer her everything she needed. Later that night, after the family had dispersed to various rooms in the ranch house or set up camp outside under the stars, Katherine and Yates sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool night air. The silence between them was comfortable, full of unspoken understanding. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Thornton had given you that loan?" Yates asked eventually. Katherine considered the question seriously. "I suppose I would have struggled along alone, maybe made it work eventually through sheer stubbornness. But I would have missed this, us. And I cannot imagine that. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "I was so nervous that day," Yates admitted. "When I approached you outside the bank, I almost walked away, told myself it was none of my business, that you would not want help from a stranger, but something pushed me forward." "I am glad it did," Katherine said softly. "You gave me more than money, Yates. You gave me partnership, respect, love. You saw me as an equal when almost everyone else saw me as a woman who should know her place. You were never going to stay in anyone's prescribed place," Yates said with a chuckle. "That was clear from the first time we talked, the way you explained your business plan with such precision and passion. You were always going to succeed at something. I just got lucky enough to be part of it." They sat together until the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew late, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting. When they finally went inside, Yates helped Katherine to her feet, his hand steady and strong, just as it had been 30 years before. The years continued to pass, bringing changes as they always did. Mary passed away peacefully in her sleep at 96, surrounded by family, her long life finally coming to a gentle close. Katherine and Yates mourned her loss deeply, grateful for the years they had been blessed to have her in their lives. James fully took over the bakery operations, with Emma returning to Mineral Park to open a satellite shop of her own specialized business. Rose's legal practice flourished, and she eventually did marry, to a fellow lawyer who shared her passion for justice and equality. Katherine and Yates spent more time at the ranch as they aged, finding peace in the quiet rhythms of rural life. Katherine still baked, but now more for pleasure than profit, creating elaborate desserts for family gatherings and experimenting with new recipes just for the joy of it. Yates tended their small herd of cattle and horses, finding satisfaction in physical work that kept his aging body strong. They grew old together gracefully, their hair turning white, their faces gaining lines that mapped their years of smiling and occasional worrying. But the love between them never aged, never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by decades of shared experiences into something unbreakable. On a clear autumn morning, when Katherine was 68 and Yates 70, they rode out together to the spring that had always been their special place. It had become a tradition over the years, this annual pilgrimage to the spot where Yates had first proposed, where they came to remember and reflect. They sat beneath the cottonwood tree, now massive and spreading, and looked out over the desert landscape they had come to love. The silence was comfortable, full of the understanding that comes from a lifetime together. "I have been thinking," Katherine said eventually, breaking the quiet, "about legacy, about what we leave behind. The bakery will carry on through James," Yates said, "and Emma has her own success. Rose is changing lives through her legal work. We have grandchildren and great-grandchildren who will carry our names and our values forward. That is legacy enough for anyone." "I know," Katherine agreed, "and I am proud of all of it, but I want to make sure the story is told too. How we started, why it mattered. I want young women who face closed doors to know that sometimes opportunity comes from unexpected places, that partnership and respect can lead to success, that love and business are not mutually exclusive." "Then write it down," Yates suggested. "Tell our story. You are the one with the words and the memory for details." "Maybe I will," Katherine said, leaning her head on his shoulder in the way she had done countless times over the decades. "Maybe I will write it all down, from that day outside the bank to right now, sitting here with you. So people understand that dreams do not have to die just because someone laughs at them. Sometimes they just need to wait for the right partner to come along." "I think that is a story worth telling," Yates agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I think you are the perfect person to tell it." They sat there for a long while, husband and wife, partners in every sense, watching the sun move across the sky and feeling the desert breeze brush against their skin. Two lives intertwined so completely that it was impossible to separate them. Two dreams that had merged into something greater than either could have achieved alone. The bakery still stood on Silver Street in Mineral Park, the sign above the door reading Calloway and Callahan Bakery, just as it had for over 4 decades. Inside, a new generation worked the ovens and served customers, continuing traditions while adding their own innovations. The business Katherine had dreamed of, and Yates had believed in, continued to thrive, a testament to vision, hard work, and partnership. But more than the business, more than the material success, the true legacy was the love story that had unfolded within those walls and beyond them. A story of courage and faith, of a woman who refused to give up on her dreams and a man who had the wisdom to recognize greatness when he saw it. A story of two people who found each other when they needed each other most and built something extraordinary together. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and gold, Katherine and Yates made their way back to the horses. They rode slowly toward home, toward the ranch house where they would share dinner and talk about the day, where they would eventually climb into the bed they had shared for decades and fall asleep in each other's arms. The following morning, Katherine began writing their story, her hand steady as she filled page after page with the details of their life together. She wrote about fear and hope, about rejection and opportunity, about the moment a dusty cowboy approached a desperate woman outside a bank and changed both their lives forever. She wrote it all down, preserving it for their children and grandchildren, for future generations who might need to hear that dreams are worth fighting for, and that partnership, true partnership built on respect and equality, could create miracles. Years later, when Katherine and Yates were both gone, having lived long, full lives together, their descendants would find that manuscript and finally understand the depth of what their grandparents had built. Not just a successful business, though that was significant. Not just a large, loving family, though that was precious. But a partnership that had weathered every storm, overcome every obstacle, and proven that when two people believe in each other and work together toward a common dream, anything is possible. The bakery continued for generations, each new proprietor adding their own chapter while honoring the foundation laid by Katherine and Yates. But the true inheritance was not the business itself, but the lesson their lives had taught. That rejection is not the end, that opportunity can come from the most unexpected sources, and that love built on mutual respect and shared dreams can sustain through anything. In the end, Edgar Thornton's laugh echoing through the bank that hot Arizona afternoon had been the catalyst for something beautiful. His dismissal had pushed Katherine into the path of the one person who would see her not as a foolish woman with unrealistic dreams, but as a visionary entrepreneur worthy of investment and partnership. And from that chance meeting had grown a love story for the ages, one that proved that sometimes the greatest successes come not from those who never face obstacles, but from those who find the courage to keep moving forward even when the world says no, and who are lucky enough to find partners willing to say yes when it matters most. Katherine and Yates Callahan had lived that truth every day of their lives together, from that first handshake sealing their business partnership to the final moments they shared in old age. They had proven that dreams could survive rejection, that love could grow from respect, and that partnership, real partnership in every sense of the word, was the greatest success anyone could achieve. Their story became legend in Mineral Park, passed down through generations as proof that the West was indeed a place where anything was possible, where old rules could be broken and new paths forged. The Calloway and Callahan Bakery stood as a monument not just to their business acumen, but to their belief in each other, a belief that had transformed two separate dreams into one shared reality that sustained and enriched everyone it touched. And somewhere, in the eternal place where souls reside beyond time and space, Katherine and Yates walked together still, hand in hand, partners forever in the greatest adventure of all, a life built on love, respect, and the courage to believe in dreams even when the world laughs. Their legacy lived on not just in the thriving business they had created or the family they had raised, but in the example they had set of what two people could accomplish when they chose partnership over competition, when they chose to believe in each other when others did not, when they chose love that honored and elevated rather than diminished and controlled. The banker had laughed when Katherine asked for a business loan, but a cowboy had invested his savings in her dream. And together, They had built an empire of love, success, and partnership that would endure long after both of them were gone, a testament to the power of believing in each other and in the dreams that make life worth living.